Now that you have all the front-end developer skills for building websites in HTML and CSS with JavaScript and jQuery, and also the back-end developer skills, coding server-side scripts in PHP, and communicating with a database via MySQL, all that really remains to add power and functionality to your apps is to be able to connect to existing web services like Google Maps, Facebook, and Twitter, and do something cool with those services for your users. And the web standard for doing that is an Application Programming Interface, or API. And it might sound a bit scary, but it's actually pretty simple, and I've got a nice, easy diagram to get the idea of how it works. Essentially, we've got your app or website running on your web server. That makes a request to another provider's web server via an API, which then returns some data to your app for you to do something with it. So for example, if you knew the location of your user and you wanted to find some local businesses or restaurants near to them, you could send the location of the user to the Google Maps API, and that would then return some local businesses in a format that you could then process and display for your users. So it's a really powerful, easy, and at the lower end, free way of getting access to the web services provided by the world's biggest companies. So APIs are pretty cool, and we're going to be looking at a few of them in this section to give you an idea about how they work and how you can integrate them into your websites. And we'll be starting using openweathermap.org to rewrite our What's the Weather web app that we made in the PHP chapter in a much better and more efficient way. And we'll do that in the next video. To get our first taste of APIs, we're going to be working with OpenWeatherMap, and we're going to use its API to get the weather rather than scraping it from a website as we did before. So as a quick reminder, previously we used weatherforecast.com, and we noted that if you search for a particular location, then it puts that location in the URL, and then we loaded that URL using file getContents in PHP, and we extracted the weather forecast from that HTML page. But we said at the time that that wasn't an ideal thing to do, partly because we might get banned from doing that by the owners of weatherforecast.com if we use their servers too much, and also because we're vulnerable to weatherforecast.com changing their HTML structure, which would then break our code and our web app wouldn't work anymore. So a much better way to do it is to use an API. Let's have a quick look and see how the OpenWeatherMap API works. So on openweathermap.org, I'm going to click API. And you can see they've got a number of different API functions. You can get the current weather, 5-day forecast, 16-day forecast, etc. We're going for the current weather at the moment, so I'm going to click API doc, and you're welcome to read this in a bit more detail if you want to know more about what's going on here. But essentially, all we need to do is to get a particular URL, like this one, so api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5 weather, and then we've got a query string, remember, question mark and then Q is equal to, and then our location. So if I just open that up in a new tab, let's see what that URL actually looks like. All right, this is it. So it's not particularly friendly looking, but this is in a format that the PHP script that we're going to use will be able to process. It's actually a format called JSON, short for JavaScript Object Notation, but it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with JavaScript, and we're going to use it in PHP here. So all we're going to do is grab the contents of this URL using file getContents, process the JSON, and then extract the bits of the weather forecast that we want and display them to the user just as before. All right. You may have noticed that we need to sign up for an API key. So I'm going to do that. Like most APIs, this has a pretty big free tier, so you can practice and mess around with it, but you need to start paying if you have a large number of users requesting data, which is fair enough. So let's get our free API key. So I'm going to be Rob Percival, rob@robpercival.co.uk. I'll put my password in here. Agree to the terms of service and then create account. Brilliant. So now I'm all set up, and the key thing that I need in more ways than one is the API key here. And I'm going to replace then the URL you notice that the URL had a default API key. So instead of using that, I'm going to use my own one. You should use your own one. And we've got the same results that we did before. Notice it can take a couple of minutes for your API key to start working. All right, so now we've got our API data. Let's jump over to Fire FTP, and I'm going to create a new section. So I'm going to create directory, and this is going to be 8-APIs. So we'll go into that folder, and then I've actually got the PHP section from the course here, and the file that I need is 7.13.php. That was the What's the Weather app, and I'm going to grab the background image as well, so it still looks nice. You can get those either from your own version of the What's the Weather app, or just go back to the lecture and click on the link to download the code. All right, now I'm just going to rename that index.php, and then we should be able to jump to Chrome and find our new page. So this is going to be completewebdevelopercourse.com/content/8-APIs/ and we should see the What's the Weather app. There we go. Wonderful. And let's just check that it still works. Put Tokyo in there. It does indeed. Wonderful. So that's great. Let's now open up using Command O or Control O index.php in our text editor. So I'm going to get rid of everything that we don't need here. So I'm just going to take us right down to if there is a city variable in the get string. And for now, what we'll do is we'll just load the data that we need. So I've just copied the URL there. So there it is, and we want file get contents, and we want to get the contents of that URL, but we want to replace the city with the city that the user has entered. There we go. And we want to leave our app ID in there. And for now, actually, we'll just echo that. So we'll display the results just to make sure that we've got some. There we go. Wonderful. So we need to then process this data so we can extract what we need. So I'm going to call this URL contents. And then remember, this is in a JSON format at the moment, and we want to get it into an array so we can extract the data. Fortunately, we've got a built-in function to process JSON in PHP, and that is JSON_decode. Does what it says on the tin, decodes JSON content. So we'll take URL contents and we'll convert that into an array, which I'll call weather array. And then we're just going to add a flag here, true, which will return the data in the form of an associative array, which we can then extract the data that we need from. So let's have a look at the contents of weather array. There we go. So you can see we've got the same data. I'm just going to right click and view page source so that we can see it a bit more clearly. All right, so this is all the data. And we can then access the main description. Oh, it's now changed to overcast clouds. And we've got things like temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, all the information we could possibly want. And we just need to extract this and put it into a format that we can use to give to the user. So I'm going to start off with this weather description here. be useful to know exactly what sort of things might appear here. So I'm just going to jump quickly back to openweathermap.org/API and take a look at the API doc again for the current weather data. And you can see there's a huge amount of information about how we can get information by zip code, by city ID, etc. Even cities within a particular area. But what I'm particularly interested in now are the parameters and what values they give us. So you can see we've got coord at the top, which we've got up here, which is of course just the longitude and latitude of the location. And then in the weather mini array, we've got weather condition ID, which we're not going to pay much attention to. And then we've got weather parameters. And this one that I've been looking at is the weather condition within the group. So I'm going to start with that one. And what we'll do is we'll start off with our weather. And we'll say the weather in, and then we'll display the city that they've requested. Is currently, and then we're going to access this variable here, the description variable, using weather array. And then we want to get the weather sub array within that. So weather, and then we want to get the 0 array within that. And then we want to get the description value within that. So that should get the contents there. And let's pop a full stop and a space at the end as well. Okay, so let's have a look, see if that's worked. There we go. Fantastic. So the weather in, we haven't got our, it's because I put Tokyo for some reason rather than city. And that's given me a notice as well, which is fair enough. All right, let's just add a little bit more information. So it'd be good to get the temperature. So the temperature is currently 281 somethings. Let's have a look at the API documentation to find out what those are. So this is in Kelvin. So let's convert from Kelvin to Celsius. Let's find out how we do that. So if we scroll down, we've got a nice question there. How do you convert Kelvin to Celsius? Here we go. So it looks like we can just subtract 273. That'll give us a nice whole number. So let's get the temperature in Celsius. And so we're going to get the temperature in Kelvin. That's going to be weather array. And this time we're going to access the main subarray. And the temperature within that. And we want to subtract 273 from that. Then let's append to our weather text. The temperature is, and then temp in Celsius. And I want to put degrees C there. So we're going to have to put the degree symbol in. I suspect we'll need an HTML character code for that. So let's work out what it is. Just click on that first list. And I'm going to use Command F or Control F on Windows and search for degree. And there we go. I could possibly have guessed that. So it's ampersand, deg, and then semicolon. And we'll have a C as well for degrees C. All right, let's close that down and take a look, see if that's worked for us. So the temperature is 7.763 degrees C, pretty accurate. I'll just change that to a capital C. Mini challenge for you there. Can you convert that to a whole number? Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. I'm just going to do a quick search. PHP convert to whole number. Get the integer value of a variable. That looks good. So we've got a PHP function, int val. That looks like it'll do what we want. So int val and then our number. Wonderful. So let's put that here. There we go. And now we should find that we've got a whole number value. Fantastic. I'm just going to take one more bit of information and I'll take the wind speed. So let's just check to see what that's measured in. So the wind speed is in meters per second. That's fine. I'll leave it as meters per second. You can work out how to convert it to miles per hour if you like. It's not that tricky. And we can actually put it just straight in here. So the wind speed is, and we're going to get that from the wind subarray and then speed. So that's weather array, wind, and then speed. And let's pop a full stop on the end there. All right, so let's take a look. Wonderful. So you can obviously customize that to contain the exact weather that you want to show to the user, which is another advantage of doing it this way. But really the big advantage is that we're doing it legally, as it were. We're doing it as the system intended. And so our web app is not going to break down simple change of HTML of a website that we don't control. All right, so just two little challenges for you to finish this one off. Firstly, can you get the web app to behave nicely if the user enters something which is not a valid city name? Go for it. All right, hope you managed that. So I'm just going to put in some random text and let's submit that. Okay, and we get all sorts of errors, notices, and a bit of gobbledygook there as well. So let's have a look and see what the weather array looks like when we try and search for an invalid city. So there we go. We've got a code of 404 and an error message as well. So we could search for that particular code, but it might be worth just checking again a valid city. And here we can see that there's a code here of 200. So it looks to me like 200 is a valid code and anything else will not be valid. So let's do a check here to see if the weather array cod or code variable is equal to 200. Don't forget your double equals. Then we'll do all of that. If it's not, then we'll display an error message. So something like, could not find city, please try again. And that just covers us more generally rather than that specific 404 error. We're now going to get a nice error message, even if there's a different sort of error. And don't forget the semicolon there, and let's then give it a go. So it's still working nicely for Paris. And if I put in some nonsense, we get a nice error message, could not find that city. All right, so we're almost there. The last mini challenge for you is to make the weather web app play nicely with cities with spaces in their names. So things like San Francisco or New York. Go for it. Okay, hope you managed it. Let's start off by seeing what happens if we search for a city with a place name in at the moment. We get a nasty error. So we're going to need to do something about that. What we did before was we just removed the space and just sent it through as San Francisco without a space. And notice that does actually work fine. If I put in San Francisco without a space, that does give me the correct weather for San Francisco. Well, I've just noticed actually we don't have units on the wind speed. So let's pop those in. That's better. But I'm going to show you another way of doing it, which is a little bit more powerful. And that's using a command called URL encode, which if you've done a bit of Googling, you might have come across. But don't worry if you hadn't. So URL encode essentially converts all of the nasty characters like question marks, equal signs, spaces, apostrophes into character codes so that they can be put into a URL without causing any problems. So let's just do that right here. So we just have to URL encode the city name. And now if we put in San Francisco with a space, we submit and we get the weather there. So that's just another solution. If you did it by removing the space, then that's a good solution too. So let's just take out our code there. And there we go. So we've recreated the What's the Weather app in a much more powerful and safer way. We can be much more confident that this app is not going to break if a website that we don't control decides to change its HTML. And we're doing it within the web rules as well, and we're using the API exactly as it was intended. So that was an introduction to APIs. We're now going to step it up a little and use a rather more complex API, the Google Maps API. So now we're going to move on from our What's the Weather app, and we're going to look at a new and hugely important and powerful API, the Google Maps API. You're almost certainly familiar with Google Maps. It's a great way to navigate from place to place, and it's a really excellent way to put maps into your websites and your apps. So take a moment to navigate to cloud.google.com/maps-platform, and if you want, have a quick scan of what's available on the Google Maps API. Essentially, you can do anything that you might want to do with maps, including working with navigation and finding specific places like restaurants, parks, etc. within your website. It might be worth quickly checking the pricing page. You get a lot on the free tier, and definitely as you're just developing, it's very unlikely you'll end up paying for anything. But always bear in mind that if your website does start getting popular, you'll likely start having to pay for your Google Maps API usage. Okay, in this video, we're just going to look at a few of the basic features of the Google Maps API, how to get started, how to display a simple map on your website, how to style that map, how to add places onto the map, and finally, how to add the user's location onto the map. So to get started, we tap the Get Started button and then pick which APIs we want to kick off with. We'll go for just maps for now. The routes and places work in a very similar way, so you'll be able to extend the code that we cover in this lecture to those pretty easily. And then continue. And then we need a project to be working with. If you've already got a project on the Google platform, you can use that, or we can create a new one. I'll just call it Test Maps Project. You can call it whatever you like, and then click Next. And then we'll need to set up billing. You probably already have a credit card connected to your Google account, but if you don't, you'll need to add one here. I've got just one billing account added, so I'm going to use that one. If you don't have one, you'll be prompted to add credit card details, and do be aware that you will start to get charged if your Maps account goes over the free usage limit. Okay, next again, and it will now set up the Google Maps APIs on your account and give you a API key which you can use to here we go, refer to yourself in your scripts. And there we go. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard and then click done. One thing just to point out before we go on and use the key to build a real MapSpace website is it is definitely worth securing your key and clarifying, say if it's only going to be used on one particular website, what that website is going to be to prevent other people from using your key without your permission. But we'll leave that for now. We're going to jump back to where we started. That is cloud.google.com/maps-platform. And then we're going to move on to the documentation. That's where all the documentation is stored. And by the way, if you can't find that link, if it's moved around on the website, you can go straight to developers.google.com/maps/documentation. Okay, and then we scroll down to see that there are various ways that you can access the API if you're working on apps, for example, but we want to work through the web, so we're going to choose the JavaScript API. And again, if you can't find that link, you might just want to go straight to developers.google.com/maps/documentation/javascript/tutorial. And then, very conveniently, we've got a great Hello World HTML page here, which I'm going to copy and paste into my text editor, get it working, and then we'll have a look through and see what this code is doing. So I'm going to head over to my Finder. I've got a test.html blank document set up on my desktop, and I'm going to open that up with brackets, and I'm going to paste the code of the sample page in. And then the one change we need to make is we need to replace your API key here with our API key. So I'll go back over to my Google Cloud Platform console and copy that and then paste it in right there. And that's it. Let's have a quick look and make sure it works. So I'm just going to save that file, go back over to Finder, and then open it up in Chrome. And there we go. So we have our very own web page with our map up and running. And you can see it's got all the basic features of Google Maps. You can switch to satellite view, zoom in and out, even drag the little man in for Street View if you like. So that's already a very powerful thing to be able to do. Let's have a quick look at the code and see how it's doing it. So it's pretty straightforward. We've got all our basic elements of an HTML page here, a little bit of styling to make it a full page map. And then we've got an empty div with an ID of map, which is obviously where our map is going to be contained. And then a bit of JavaScript here, which creates the map. So it creates a variable called map, and then it creates a function called initMap, which initializes the map using various settings. So you can see it takes the variable map here and turns it into a new Google Maps map based on the div with an ID of map, which is this one here. And then it adds a couple of settings, sets the center, gives a certain latitude and longitude, and gives a certain zoom level as well. So let's see what happens if we up the zoom level to say 15 and then refresh the page. You can see we're far more zoomed in. So here's a quick challenge for you. Can you change this code so it shows us a map of London, which is reasonably zoomed out so that we can see the whole of London? Good luck. Go for it. Did you manage it? It's simply a matter of knowing the latitude and longitude of London. Which Google, of course, can tell us latitude and longitude of London. There we go. So the latitude is 51.5. Let's pop that in there. And the longitude 0.1278. We probably don't need to be that accurate, but that'll work. And then let's guess the zoom level. I'm going to be slightly more zoomed in than we started with. Let's see if a zoom level of 9 looks about right. And there we go. That's pretty good. You might want to zoom in a little bit more just so that we only have London, but I think that's pretty close to what we were looking for. Great. Just one final bit to note in the code is that, of course, we have this script down here, which is what is doing the magic. So this is calling Google Maps API JavaScript and essentially telling it to run the init map function, which is what we've defined here. So really, that's the basics of adding maps to your app. Of course, they don't need to be full screen. We can make them, let's say, 200 pixels square, just like any other div, and that will then appear as part of your website rather than the whole thing. But for now, let's leave it as full screen. Okay, so now we'll just jump back over to the documentation and just see a couple of other things that we can do. So quickly here, we'll see how to add a marker onto our map, which is something common you might want to do if you're writing a contact us page, for example, and you want to show where a business is on the map. You can do that very easily. So again, let's take the code here. And I'm going to just replace everything, which means I'll have to copy my key again and pop it back in here. So again, let's have a look, just make sure that works, and then we'll take a moment to look at the code, see what it's doing. There we go. So we've got a marker at a place called, oh dear, I don't think I'm even going to try and pronounce that, but at that place there. And this is created again. We've got the same setup as before with an init map function there, but this time we're using some different settings to add our marker. So we've got a variable called Uluru with a certain latitude and longitude. And then we create our map, and you can see here we're creating a new marker at that location. So another quick challenge for you. Can you create a map with a marker on Niagara Falls? Simple as that. Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. Again, it's just a matter of getting the location, that is the latitude and longitude of the place where you want to add a marker, and adding those in there. And in fact, that should be enough. Let's have a look. And something's gone horribly wrong there. Hopefully some of you had got this problem and saw how to fix it. This time, instead of east, you can see we've got 79 degrees west. And we put that into our website using minus 79.0849. So if you see south there on the latitude, then you'll need to add a minus in there as well. Okay, try that again. And there we go. So that is now centered nicely on Niagara Falls. Of course, to make your code make sense, I'd rename that variable Niagara so that when you come back to it, you're not completely confused as to why you've called Niagara Uluru. All right, so we're nearly there. The last thing we're going to do is see how to style your map. So on the left there, we've got the link. Again, if the link's in a different place, you might just want to go straight to the URL, which is that one there. Styling maps is pretty easy. And as before, we'll take the code, copy it, run it, and then have a look to see what it's doing. And because I've replaced the API key, I'll need to put that back in again. Okay, let's have a look. And there we go. So I've got a nice night mode map of New York City there. Let's have a little look. So once again, we're using the function initMap to create our map. This time we've got a center somewhere in New York City and a zoom level, and this time we have a styles object. And all it's doing is adding styles to various elements. So you can see we've got some geometry here with a certain color, labels, text, and labels, text, fill, again with certain colors, and you can add any settings you want. We've got points of interest there, parks, roads, highways, etc., etc. So you get the idea. You can customize the display of pretty much anything on the map. And just one more thing, the Google Maps API also makes it very easy to get the user's location, which can be extremely useful if you want to create a website that shows them places near them, for example. So let's see how we do that. You can see an option here called geolocation. So click on that option. Geolocation is essentially working out the location of your users. So let's see how it's done. Just as we've done before. Take the sample code, copy it into your site, and then replace your API key with your API key. Okay, and let's take a look. If we refresh that now, and now you'll see that we're asked whether we want to allow this website to view our location. So click allow, and then it should jump over to your location with a little box there. You'll notice that it's not super accurate depending on the device that you're on. I'm actually in Cambridge over here, so it's not super close. If you're on a phone, it should use the GPS to give you a more accurate location, but if you're just on Wi-Fi, it won't be particularly accurate. But let's just have a quick look and see how it's doing that. So it's a little bit more complicated this time, but again, we're creating the map using the init map method. And you can see this time we've got an info window, which is this little box here. And you can see what it's doing is attempting to get the location. And when it does that, if it's successful, i.e. you've given it permission and the browser gives your location to the script, then it processes that, gets the latitude and longitude, sets the position for the info window, sets a bit of content, and puts the info window on the map, and then it also sets the center of the map. That's if it's successful. If it's not, then it shows an appropriate error message. And that's processed down here in this handle location error function, where it gives the user an appropriate error. So there we go. That's how you get the user's location and show it on a map using the Google Maps API. All right. So there's obviously a huge amount more you can do with the Google Maps API. This is just a way to get you started and to see how useful the Google documentation is and how easy it is to create your own maps from it. So have a think about how you might add some maps to a website. Now that we've seen how to work directly with maps in the Google Maps API, we're going to use another one of its functions called geocoding. And this will give us an opportunity to use an aspect of the API that doesn't actually require a map at all. All right. So geocoding is the process of taking an address and working out exactly where it is. And that's something that Google Maps does for you very nicely. So if we click on samples again from the Google Maps JavaScript API page, and you can see down here we've got geolocation. So this is actually a really nice example which does a fair bit more than it needs to. We get a little pop-up which, once you've given it permission, it finds your location and puts it on a map. So let's grab all of that code. I'm going to copy it and we'll have a quick look at it to see how it works. And I'm going to copy everything above that final script because that contains my API key. So then I'll just get rid of that bit from the demo code, and then let's have a look. So it loads up the map. It requests to know your location, and if you press allow, then it shows you exactly where your location is. So this time, rather than go through the code in detail with you, I'm going to set you a mini challenge, and that is change the code so as well as pointing to your location on the map, it also alerts the user's latitude and longitude. Go for it. All right, did you manage it? Let's take a look. So it should have been pretty simple once you've had a look at this code. We're familiar with this first bit here, which creates the Google map. We've then got an info window, which I would guess is this location found box which pops up. And then here, this is where it's doing the get current position. And in fact, here is where we get the latitude and longitude. So to display them, we can just use alert and then something like latitude. And then we can get that from the pos array or position array. And then we want the latitude or lat within that array. And then for the longitude, we'll get again pos, and then this time we want lung. All right, let's take a look. And there we go. So we've got the latitude there and the longitude. So now that we've seen how to get the user's location, we're going to see how to geocode with the Google Maps API. And this is, again, how to get the full details of an address or particular location. So click back on Google Maps APIs. Then now we're going to look at web services. So the web APIs that we've just looked at integrate directly into your HTML pages. Web services work a bit more like a traditional API in that we call a particular URL and then get some data back from that. So let's see how we make that work. First off, we'll get a key. So this works in exactly the same way as with the Google Maps JavaScript API. And I'm just going to create a new project again, and that will generate the API key. While that's going, let's jump back to our web services documentation page and click Google Maps Geocoding API. And here we go. So you can see the geocoding is a process of taking an address and converting it into geographical coordinates. It also will fill out the address for us. So for example, it will take a part of an address and make it into a full address with postcode and everything else, which will help us with the postcode app that we're going to make in the next video. So here we go. We're going to make a request to this URL, and it's going to return in JSON or XML. And we're going to be using JSON here. So I'm going to scroll down. Feel free to read the documentation in a bit more detail, but I'm going to go straight to an example. So here's a full URL. Let's copy it into our web page. So I'm going to get rid of everything here, and we're going to start by doing this in PHP. So this is the URL that we need. Obviously, we need to replace the API key with our API key, which should now almost have been created. Just need to click create there, and then that will create the key for us. And there it is. So let's copy that over onto our URL, and then we'll use file get contents to get the contents of the URL. So let's take a look at that. So you can see straight away, immediately we've got everything that we need. So we've got an address components here, long name, short name, etc. We've got the town or city, the state, country, and the zip code there as well. And finally, we've got the latitude and longitude. So as we've already processed JSON with PHP, we're going to do it with JavaScript this time, or specifically with jQuery. And this will prepare for our postcode web app. So to get the contents of a URL using JavaScript or jQuery, we use AJAX. And normally AJAX is limited to URLs on the same domain as your code. But there are some exceptions, and one of those is the data is encoded in JSON. And when that's the case, we can do what's known as a cross-domain request to get the data. So let's firstly get jQuery back in our app. I'll do that with a jQuery CDN Google search, CDN being Content Delivery Network, and I'll go for the google.com CDN, and there we go. We'll go for this one. All right, I'll leave that there for the moment, but we'll create a very simple HTML page with just a title, geocoding an address, and then a body. And then just after that, we're going to have our jQuery. So now let's write some JavaScript to get our data. So we'll set up our JavaScript, and then the AJAX call is going to be pretty similar to what we're used to, but with a couple of small differences. So we start off as before, calling the AJAX function. And then we're going to do this with a bunch of parameters. And the first one is going to be, as usual, the URL. And that, of course, is going to be the same as what we had before. And then we'll add a type of get. So this is a get request rather than a post one, because we're just getting something, we're not posting any variables. And then we just need to add a function to happen on success. So when the data is returned. So let's create a function which will contain the variable data. And then for now, we'll just console.log the JSON data. And then if I spell function correctly, we'll now be able to get the data via AJAX rather than PHP. So let's have a look. I'm going to right click and inspect to take a look at the console. And you can see we've got an object there. And this has all the data that we need in that we've seen before. So if, for example, we wanted to get these address components, so the number, the route or road name, etc., then we'd have to loop through this particular JSON array. So for example, we could use the jQuery each function, which loops through objects in an array just like this. And we want to loop through the results part of our data because that's where all the results are contained. So we want to apply the each function on data results, and then we want to do something with that data. So we'll create a function, and in this function we're going to have a key and a value, and the key is going to represent the name, so that bit there, and the value is going to represent the value, so 1600 or that array there. And then we'll create that, and then for now we'll just alert the key just to see what we get. Let's take a look. So you can see we've got 0 there, and that's because within the results array there's only one item, and that's this whole array here containing all of our data. So let's narrow in a little bit and loop through results 0 instead. So this will be the first set of results, and you can see that the first key within that is address components, and then formatted address, geometry, place ID, and types. So that's these elements here: formatted address, geometry, place ID, and types. So if we want to get the address components, we could go even further into that and look at the address components array. And let's now have a loop through that. So we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. You get the idea. So that's looping through each of these sub arrays. So now that you know roughly how these things work, I'm just going to set you a mini challenge. Can you get the country? So can you add some code from here to get either United States or US from this data? It's not easy, but you should be able to figure it out. Go for it. Well, I hope you managed it. So the way I'm going to do it is looking at value. And value is this array here, and then this one and this one. So for each of the values, we want to be looking at value and types. And we want to find the one that has a type of country. So notice that types itself is an array. So the bit that we're going to be interested is types 0, which is the first item in the types array there. So let's take a look. Let's first off just see what that value is. So it starts off as street number, route, locality, administrative area, and country. So we want to check to see if the type, that is value types 0, is equal to country. Then we want to alert the long name or the short name. So let's just go for value short name. Let's take a look. And there we go. So I hope you figured out something fairly simple. Essentially, it's a matter of looping through until we find the type that we want and then extracting that data. Great. So now that we're reasonably familiar with the Google Maps APIs, we're going to make a little web app that allows people to extract the postcode or zip code. All right, so to give you a bit of practice of using the Google Maps API, I'm going to set you a challenge, and for once, I'm not going to show you what it looks like beforehand. So you'll need to use your imagination a little bit. In terms of design, I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I'll just use a basic bootstrapped site, but the functionality is really simple as well. We want a box for a user to put any part of an address, so a town name or a street name and a number. And then using Ajax, we're going to do a call to the Google Maps geocoding API and return the zip code or postcode for that address. It's a pretty simple function, but one that people might find useful when you're mailing a card to a friend or something like that. So that's it. Doesn't have to look great, but feel free to go crazy on the design if you want. Best of luck. All right, here we go then. So I'm going to start with my Bootstrap 4. Just to get a very simple layout. So documentation and getting started. And then use the starter template as usual. And then let's just have a look. Here we go. So that's working great. I'm just going to put a title in, which will be postcode finder. There we go. All right, I'll leave Bootstrap open, but now we'll go to Google Maps geocoding API. There we go. So that top one there, and we're going to scroll down again to the example. Here we go. So let's select all of that. And now let's put in our Ajax request. So this should be fairly familiar as we did it just in the previous video. So we use $.ajax and then we set up our parameters, so URL, and that's going to be that URL. We'll get the API key in a moment, and then type is going to be get, and success, we're going to create a function which is going to return some data, and for now we'll just log that to the console. So I'm going to go over to the console, that's console.developers.google.com, and that's where all of your keys will be stored if you need to go back to them. So we'll get to the dashboard, and this is for my latest project. So I'm then going to click Enable API keys and get credentials, and then click credentials, and there's my API key. Brilliant, so let's copy that in there. And then let's run this again and have a look at the console. We've got a warning about the Bootstrap tooltips require tether. That's fine. We're not going to be using those, but we do have our response there. Fantastic. So let's get the bits that we'll need, and we'll write code similar to what we had last time. So those are the bits that we're interested, but we don't want the country this time. We want the postal code. So we're going to have to loop through until we get exactly what we need. The reason, by the way, that we don't go straight to number 6 is that the postal code won't always be number 6, but it will always have a type of postal code. So that's why we do the looping through version. All right, so again, we use each, and we're looping through data and results, and then 0, and then address, components, and then when we get there, we're looping through each of those until we get to one with a type of postal code. So we're going to get that first off by adding our function in here with, again, a key and a value. And we're going to be interested in value because value is going to be that array there. So we're going to be looking at value, and then types, and then 0. And we want to find out when value types 0 is equal to postal code. And for now, when that's the case, we'll just alert value long name. So as we can tell, long name and short name are going to be the same. So I'll stick with long name. There we go. So now let's have a look. And I've got an unexpected token on line 26. What have I done? Ah, yes. I've closed the parentheses there when it should be after the curly brackets there. All right, let's try that again. There we go. So we've got our postal code. So now let's put it somewhere rather more useful than just alerting it. So let's write a little bit of HTML. We're going to start with a class of container. And we'll just add in a little bit of text here. So postcode finder, and then enter a partial address to get the postcode. And there we go. We've got our title and text there. I'm just going to, for the moment, comment out the code to get the postcode so that we can set up our form. And I'm going to do that in the usual way, going back over to Bootstrap and then finding the form component. So clicking components and then forms. And I'm just going to start off with that big template there. We definitely don't need most of that. So let's take a look. We can get rid of everything above the button all the way up to that top field set there. And then I'm going to change this to address. And we'll just have address as the label. The type is going to be text. ID is address. And we'll have the placeholder as enter partial address. And we don't need the comment about the email address there. And I'm going to get rid of the type is submit for the button because we don't want submit to actually submit the form. We're going to process that with our JavaScript. Okay, so that's looking good. We now want to change this script so that it happens when the button is clicked. So let's give this button an ID of find postcode. And then we'll uncomment the JavaScript there. And then we want to check to see whether the button with an ID of find postcode has been clicked. And when it has, we want to run a function which will be our Ajax. All right. So for now, let's just check that that's linked up correctly to our button. Wonderful. It is indeed. And then we need to change the address here from being the same every time to being whatever the user has typed into the address field. So we're going to get that from an ID of address. So that was up here. We gave it an ID of address, and then we want to get the value. And it's likely that this will have some spaces and maybe some strange characters in there. So we really want to do something to this to make it URL safe, so that when we put it into this URL, it doesn't have any spaces or things that are going to break the URL. Now, a few videos ago, we saw within PHP, you can use a function called URL encode to do that. But we can be reasonably confident that there's a jQuery equivalent, or even a JavaScript one. So let's have a look at that top result. Encode URI component. That looks pretty perfect. So let's use that in our code, and we'll encode it right there. There we go. Great. And then just before we run that, we do need to stop the form from being submitted when we press the button. And the easiest way to do that is to add an E to refer to the event that caused the click. And then we want to take E and prevent the default thing happening. We've done that a couple of times before. So that should stop the form from submitting. Okay, so let's give this a try. I'm going to put in 109 Birdwood Road, and we'll submit, and we've got not my postcode, but a zip code of some sort, which is promising. And I'm just going to add a bit more information there. So if we put Cambridge, UK in, then we do get the correct postcode. Fantastic. So everything's working well. We don't want to have this in an alert though, at least not a pop-up sort of alert. I'm going to put it in a nice pretty Bootstrap alert. Let's go back to Bootstrap, get the code for an alert. Here we go. So we'll do our usual thing. We'll put a div with an ID of message, and that's where we're going to put our response. So instead of alerting the postcode, we'll set the message div to have HTML of, then I'm using single quotes there because there are going to be double quotes inside the string. Just get rid of that line break there. And we'll have something like postcode found. The postcode is, and then we'll use value long name. There we go. Just get rid of that line break again. And I've somehow got myself an extra double quote at the end there. So I'll just get rid of that, and then let's give this a try. So we'll do our 109 Birdwood Road, Cambridge again, submit, and there we go. Oh, would help if I spelled postcode right there. But you get the idea. All right, so we're pretty close now. We've got something that works. Just make sure it works with the correct spelling as well. There we go, beautiful. One thing we don't have at the moment is if we have some invalid input. I actually managed to find a postcode for that. If we put something really long, I presume it won't be able to find a postcode for it. Yeah, there we go. It's just not updating at all. And just to prove there, in fact, if we leave the address blank, then at the moment it does nothing. So let's have another look at what is returned from the Google Maps API when an invalid address is sent. So I'm going to inspect there to have a look at the console. So we've got our object. We've also got an error message because it's trying to read an array that doesn't exist. But we should be able to stop that happening. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. We get a status of 0 results. Let's just have another look at what we get with a success. There we get a status of OK. So actually I think it's probably best to check for a status of OK. And if we've got that, do the success. Otherwise, give them an error message. So what we'll do is we'll check for data status, and we'll initially check to see whether it's not OK. And then if it's not OK, then we'll update the message. So I'll just copy this code, and this time we'll have an alert warning, and we'll just say postcode could not be found. Please try again. And if that's not the case, then we'll go through our each loop and hopefully find the postcode. All right, let's take another look then. So if I submit something empty, postcode could not be found, please try again. Whereas if I put in a normal address, we've got the postcode. Fantastic. So that's as far as I'm going to go with this. We've got elegant error handling and the website works as requested. And it's worth taking a minute to just see what we've achieved there in just a few minutes of writing code hooked into a global postcode finding system, which would have taken us years to write ourselves. And we haven't even paid anything for the privilege. So that is the power of an API. In the next video, we're going to see one more type of API that allows us to actually log in to an online platform. And we're going to do that with Twitter. The third type of API that we're going to be looking at is one that allows you to actually log in to a web system and then do things within that. And we're going to be doing that with the Twitter API, which allows you to do pretty much anything you can do on Twitter. So we can read people's tweets, we can tweet out, we can send direct messages, we can do all sorts of things. So this is a level above the Google Maps API in terms of interactivity. We're not just pulling information here, we're actually making things happen as well. As you might imagine, it's therefore a little bit more complicated, but don't worry, I'll guide you through it step by step. So first off, we need to create a Twitter developer account if you don't already have one. So go to dev.twitter.com and then click sign in. Now, if you have a Twitter account, you can sign in there, but I'm just going to show you the process from scratch so you can see the whole thing. So I'll start off with my name and then rob@codestars.com, and then I'll type a password. All right, I'll skip the phone validation for now, and then I'll use one of these slightly horrendous looking suggestions. And I'll just save that on LastPass in case I need to come back to it later. All right, so because I've created an account, it's taken me back to Twitter. So I'm now going to go back to dev.twitter.com. So this is where you'll be if you already have a Twitter account. And now we're going to go to developers and documentation. So as always, you can spend a bit of time reading this if you want to get more information on how you can use the Twitter API. As you can see, there's a number of different ways you can do it. The way we're going to be working with is OAuth. So this essentially allows you to authorize yourself as a Twitter user within your app, and that will allow you to view tweets, send tweets, and do pretty much anything else within the Twitter ecosystem. And the first thing you need to do to access the Twitter API via OAuth is create an app. And we do that at apps.twitter.com. So if you're logged in, then it will take you to the Twitter apps page where you probably won't have any apps. So we'll create a new one. And we're not actually making an app here, but we're essentially setting up credentials for us to be able to log in to the Twitter API. So we'll just fill in these details. So I'll just call it my Twitter API app. This is a demo app for the Twitter API. I'll just put a placeholder here. twitterappdemo.com. I don't know if there's a website there. And we'll leave the callback URL blank. We're not going to be using that. Then we'll agree to the terms and conditions and create our Twitter application. And one thing, I do need to add my mobile phone number to Twitter. And we do that on the main Twitter website. So I'm just going to go to twitter.com. And then under my little symbol there, I'll click settings. And then mobile. And I'll just pause the recording while I enter my mobile number. And now that's done, let's go back over to create an application and attempt it again. Oh, we're getting very close. Just need to put in, I'll just put a random number at the end of that. And then we'll try again, and we've got it. All right. And the main thing we're interested in here are our keys. So if we click Manage Keys and Access Tokens, you can see we've got a consumer key and a consumer secret. And these are your two API keys. And this one you can make public if you want, but the secret you should very much keep private, because anyone who has access to that will be able to access everything that you can do within your app. So our last thing to do here in the Twitter website is to create an access token, which will allow us to access the Twitter API through this app. And there we go. So once again, we've got a token and a secret. And the reason you have an access token as well as an API key is because you might want to access the Twitter API from a number of different places, from your website, from your app, or from somewhere else. And you might therefore want to have a different access token for each of those setups. Okay, so now we've set up everything that we need for our Twitter app. We now need to write the code to connect to it. Now, fortunately, there's a great PHP library that we can use to do the hard work of connecting to the API. And we can find that by searching for something like Twitter OAuth PHP. And this will take you to the Twitter OAuth page on GitHub. As always, you can read more about that at the homepage twitteroauth.com, but we're just going to download it and make a start with it. There are basic instructions there. In case you have any problems with this particular version, I've also saved a version on the website for this course, and there's a link to that in the next lecture, so you can use that version if you prefer. But for now, we'll just download zip, and I'll save it on the desktop, and then we'll unzip it, and we'll have a quick look inside. So there we go. You can see we've got a bunch of PHP files, which we will of course need to upload to our server. So back over to FireFTP, and I'm just going to click on the Twitter OAuth master folder, and then click the arrow to upload everything within that. Wonderful. So let's have a look then at twitteroauth.com and see how we set this up. We're not using Composer here, so we'll scroll down to the old-fashioned way, which is just downloading and uploading to our server. And then you can see we've got here our 2 lines of code that we'll need. It's pretty simple. So we just require, which is essentially the same as including. And I'm going to get rid of everything here. So we'll require that, but bear in mind this link is slightly different here, so I'm just going to rename that. So right click and rename, so it's just Twitter OAuth, and then that should match that, and then we'll just use that bit of code, and then it's these 2 lines of code that we're going to need. So I'll paste those in, and we're going to need to replace these with our various access tokens. So let's get all of those set up. What I'd normally do is set those at the beginning of our code so we don't have them kind of deeply embedded. So we'll start off with the consumer key. So that's equal to that. Then we've got consumer secret, which is equal to this long thing. Then we've got our access token, which is this, and our access token secret, which is that. And be careful not to copy. I've got a little space at the end of mine there. That's not part of it. So then I'll just replace these with my variable names. So consumer key, consumer secret, access token, and access token secret. And there we go. So the only change I'm going to make here is just to print content there to see what is returned by the Twitter API when we attempt to verify the credentials. And if you'll notice, I've actually got a couple of other bit of blank space there. So it's very easy to get those when you're copying and pasting the access codes. So make sure you've got rid of any spaces and line breaks, and then we'll open this up in a new tab, and we'll just jump over to same page as before. Keep your fingers crossed, and there we go. So if you've done everything right, we'll just view the source. You should get something that looks like this. So you get the name, screen name, and a bunch of other information about that particular user. Wonderful. So all looking good so far. Let's see if we can get the tweets of this person. So first off, I'm going to jump to Twitter and make a quick tweet so that we've got something on our timeline. This is my first tweet. Inspirational stuff. Okay. So now if we go back to twitteroauth.com, we can then scroll down and we can see how it actually works. So once we've done the OAuth, it actually works in quite a similar way to the Google Maps API. Essentially, we've got a URL that we need to access to do something. Because we're accessing this through OAuth, though, we don't just use file get contents, we use this method here. So connection and then get. So let's try that out. So instead of printing content, or print statuses. And you've got a fairly obvious couple of variables there that count is currently equal to 25 and exclude replies is true. So let's have a look. There we go. This is looking good. Again, we'll view source to make it a bit clearer. And then you can see we've got this is my first tweet there. And we've got a bunch of other information about the tweet as well, like where it came from, the user, and the date and time as well. Excellent. So we're looking good. The last thing I want to show you is how to post to the Twitter API, and specifically how to send a tweet. So let's go back to twitteroauth.com. And here we go. So it's as simple as this. We just post instead of get, and we're posting to statuses/update, and then we're adding our new status, which is essentially our new tweet. So let's do that just before we get the tweets, and then we should be able to see it. And all right, this came from my Twitter app. Wonderful. All right, let's take a look. So we'll refresh that, looking promising. And okay, so great. This came from my Twitter app, definitely seems to have been returned. Let's have a look on Twitter itself. And with any luck, it should be there. Wonderful. So in just a few minutes, we've set up a new app that we can use to connect to Twitter, and we can view the user's timeline and send tweets as well. And in the next video, we're going to put this together to make a small but very functional Twitter client. So now that you've learned how to connect to and work with the Twitter API, this challenge is going to be an opportunity to put that into practice. It's not a particularly complicated one, but it will require you to work through the Twitter documentation for its API and process the results that come out of it. Like with the previous challenge, I'm not going to show you my output in advance, so you have to figure out how you're going to make the Twitter client look. Essentially, the project that we're going to try and create is pretty simple. I want a Twitter client that displays the tweets on my timeline, but I only want to see the ones that have been favorited at least twice. And my aim for this, of course, is to filter out lots of tweets that I might not be interested in and just see the most popular ones. So that's the challenge. Just before I set you off to do that, might be worth having a quick Google of Twitter API endpoints. So an endpoint is essentially the URL where you can access Twitter, like statuses update, statuses home timeline, etc. And once you've done that Googling, it will take you to this page, and you can see we've got all the different URLs here to do all sorts of different things to do with the Twitter system. So that page you'll probably need. The other thing you'll probably want to do if you've just created a Twitter account is to follow a bunch of people. So I'm just going to follow whoever is suggested here. You'll get a different set of suggestions, of course, but that should give me a bit of a timeline to work with. Without that, then there won't be much to choose between. All right, so that's the challenge. Off you go, and best of luck. All right, I hope that went well. The first thing that we're going to need is to see how to get the user's timeline. That is, this set of tweets that will appear on the user's homepage. So if we have a look down at the various options within the Twitter API, so if we look back to our code, you can see that the API endpoint we used to get the user's tweets was statuses/home_timeline. So let's have a quick look at that one and see what it does. So home timeline, it returns a collection of the most recent tweets and retweets posted by the authenticated user and the users that they follow. So that's actually what we need to get the tweets themselves. So if we now have a look at that, because we've followed a bunch of people, we should have a lot more statuses on there than we had before. So I'm just going to get rid of the instruction to post because we don't want to post that every time we run our script. And yep, definitely looks like we've got a lot more information than we had before. So let's have a look. Wonderful. Yep, so we're definitely getting some tweets from various people there, the Bodleian libraries, etc. Wonderful. And you can see we've got this very important variable, favorite count. So that's obviously what we're going to be using to tell whether or not a tweet is important enough for us to feature it in our client. So let's just tidy things up a little bit and then we'll start processing this. So first off, we're going to want to loop through the array that we've got here. So you can see we've got this 0 and then all the information for that particular tweet. And then after all of that, we've got a 1 and then the next tweet and then a 2, etc. So we want to loop through that array. So let's do that first off. We'll do that with a for each. Statuses as, and we don't actually need the number there, so I'm just going to do statuses as tweet. And then for now, we'll just print the tweet content. There we go. So that should give us something pretty similar, but it won't have the array at the top because we're just printing the content. All right, so let's try and get the text of each tweet for the moment. Now you might guess that to get the text, you would do something like text, like that, because that's how we normally access an array. Aha, but something's gone wrong here. This is a type std class, and we're trying to access it like an array. So we need to use a different formatting because this isn't quite an array, it's actually an object, which works slightly differently. But never fear. Let's do a quick Google and figure out how we would do it. So access elements in standard class object. PHP was what I was after there. Ah, there we go. How to access standard class object after a specific key value pair. Let's have a look. Aha. So to access that data, we actually use an arrow or a dash and a greater than sign, and then the name of the variable that we want. So again, that's because these are different sorts of variables to arrays, so we have to use a different syntax to extract the data that we want. So let's give that a try. We want to get the text. And then I'll just put in a line break as well. So it's one after the other. And I'm also going to open that in a new tab so that we keep the old one open as well. And there we go. So we don't actually need to view source because I put a BR in there. So now we've got the text of each of those tweets, and you can see we've got my 2 there as well. and then a bunch of other ones. All right, so now is the time to work out how many favorites each one has, and then only display the ones that have 2 or more. And if we scroll down, you can see we've got a favorite count here, but that's actually the favorite count for the user, not for that particular tweet. So that's not what we want. If we keep on going, then we've got the favorite count right there. Wonderful. So that's what we need. Wonderful. So that's what we need. So instead of tweet text, we'll use tweet and favorite count. Let's just have a look and check that that's returning the number that we're after. Wonderful, there we go. So we've got a whole range there. I wonder what that exciting tweet is. Let's have a look. So we want to check to see if the tweet favorite count is greater than or equal to 2. Then we'll echo. We don't actually need to use print r this time because it's just a string. Favorite count. And next to that, we'll put the tweet text as well. And then we'll move the line break into the if statement. And have a look. Oops, something's gone horribly wrong. Oh, sadly, I can't spell favorite the way I want to. Fair enough. There we go. So now we've got our favorite count and our tweet text. If you're interested, that very popular one was recovered from the Brit Awards. And then there's another surprisingly popular one about Grimsby as well. So this is pretty good, but it's not the sort of thing I would want to look at every day. It's not particularly pretty, and it doesn't even tell me who made the tweet. So I wonder if there's a way I can display a single tweet nicely. So I've cheated slightly because it's not the most obvious one, but I know that status's embed is what we need there. So this returns a single tweet specified by the web URL or the ID in an embed format. So it's an HTML snippet that we can include directly on our page. So we're going to need to pass that the ID of our tweet, and we do that in the ID variable. So that should be reasonably straightforward. Let's do that here. So we get the tweet ID like that. And then I'm going to copy that page there, but we'll change this to just status. And then instead of statuses / home timeline, we want to use statuses / embed. And then we want to give an ID, and that ID is going to be tweet ID, and we don't want to send this exclude replies variable. And then I'll just close the square bracket there. And because we don't know quite what we're going to get, let's print the whole thing. Okay, let's take a look. All right, that's looking good. And you can see we're actually getting nice HTML of all of these tweets now. That looks a lot more pleasant. So let's have a look. Where do we get that HTML? It's in the HTML field. Makes sense? So let's echo that instead. So it's going to be status, arrow, HTML. Let's take a look. It'll take a little while to encode them, but there we go. So all in a nice, pretty HTML-ified format. and that is only the ones with more than one favorite. So that's as far as we go. So that's as far as I'm going to go with this Twitter client. You're welcome to make it pretty, put a nice background and a nav bar up the top if you want, but we've done that enough times now for you to know how to do it. And it also brings us to the end of the APIs section of the course. So we've learned how to get the weather, how to access Google Maps using our API key, and how to log into the Twitter API via OAuth. So those are 3 different types of API, but all of them very powerful and actually pretty easy to use once you know how. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you're getting a lot of exciting ideas of how you could use these powerful web APIs in your websites and web apps. And we're going to be moving on to see how we can make actual apps for the App Store and Google Play Store purely out of HTML. We'll see how to do that in the next section.